This interview is presented by Caucus. Caucus is the group discussion forum and mini think tank of Hindu College, established in 2007. We regularly write and deliberate on topics related to national, international, and socio-economic importance. Probe is our monthly magazine which allows us to host experts from different fields to understand political, social, and economic realities directly from the people who know the best. Recently, Probe has completed its first year anniversary, and this interview will be a special issue for the month of January. We are also elated to announce Nikor Associates as our sponsors for this issue of Probe. It is an immense pleasure to introduce our guest today, Ms. Lekha Chakraborty. Ma'am is a professor at NIPFP and elected member of the Governing Board of Management, International Institute of Public Finance, Munich. She is a pioneer economist in institutionalizing gender budgeting in India with Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India in 2004. Ma'am is a research affiliate at the Levy's Economics Institute of Bard College, New York. She is the author of Fiscal Consolidation, Budget Deficits, and Macroeconomy and has co-authored other books. She has worked for the IMF, the World Bank, the UNESCAP, the UNDP, the UN Women, and Commonwealth Secretariat on various short stints. She was also twice an awardee of Shastri Indo-Canada Program from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Government of Canada. Thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, ma'am, today's conversation will revolve around budget, which was introduced in the backdrop of a global pandemic, inflation, and rising oil prices. The budget has focused on four main pillars: productivity, climate action, financing investments, and PM Gati Shakti plan. We will also discuss where the budget the target and what entails ahead for India. Now, I request Arnav to please go ahead with the first question.
Thank you, Mudita, and thank you, ma'am, for giving us the opportunity to interact with you. We are very delighted to interact with you. And now we would like to formally begin our discussion with the first question. Ma'am, recently, Union Finance Minister Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman tabled the budget for financial year 23 in the Lok Sabha, and there seems to have been a greater push towards economic growth by increasing the capital expenditure. But several criticisms have come up that this increase in capital expenditure was at the cost of welfare and equity expenditure. How do you consider this statement? Because government seems to be banking on the conclusion found out in economic survey, where it has been claimed that growth continues to be one of the most important factors in case of India to propel the living standard of the people. So how do you consider this fact that we have increased capex at the cost of equity and welfare expenditure?
Oh, great. Arnab, this question is an intelligent question. At the same time, it is very humane because you have understood that the overall objective or overall emphasis of this budget is on economic growth recovery through capital infrastructure. So the emphasis was on public investment in capital infrastructure, and we think that that will crowd in private corporate investment. So that's the entire narrative of this budget. But as you rightly pointed out, the humanitarian crisis, how we are tackling those elements regarding the financing of human development. And you are right that we have concerns that the recovery is uneven. That's a single most significant concern we have. The growth recovery is there, but it is quite uneven. But at the same time, when we look into the budget, financing human development aspects related to employment, related to food security, social security, all these elements, we have seen a kind of reduction in the revenue spending. That's an area of concern. But my hunch is, like over the years or within this 1 year, outside the purview of the budget announcement, because budget is not everything. So we are expecting that a kind of fiscal stimulus package, that announcement will be there soon to tackle these elements related to, humanitarian crisis. Because, you are correct that our narrative of the last year's budget, if you look into, the political economy was focusing on welfare models, that we are supporting, like poor people, that last mile connectivity was our issue. And one of the flagship programs like Ujjwala, that is providing clean fuel to the women in the low income households. But it is surprising to hear that Ujjwala, that program of energy infrastructure, in gender budgeting, that policy of providing clean fuel to the women in the poor households, that program was rolled up in September 2020. So if you look at the gender budget, it is a powerful PFM tool, but you look at that statement, you cannot see Ujjwala is there anymore. That petroleum ministry, they have this program, and you can't see Ujjwala program anymore. So it's a matter of concern, but at the same time, we have a very high fiscal deficit number. We are substantiating that high fiscal deficit number by focusing on public investment. And of course, it's a long-term multiplier effect that, we get the growth recovery through the capex. But, short-term corrections, as you rightly mentioned, we need to focus on, the welfare related programs, that rights based, programs which we've had announced in the last budget. I think a continuity is expected regarding those budgetary allocations, but not a reduction, thinking that revenue spending is bad, but capital spending is good. No, I have, serious concerns about that, just like you. Over to you, Arnav.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a great response. We had a great learning experience with your response. Now, moving ahead, we would like to have another question. Ma'am, in case of India, we see that government continuously emphasizes on Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. And in the budget also we can see that government has given a significant push to production linked incentive scheme and Make in India initiative. But given the domestic situation prevailing in our country, where the private final consumption expenditure is decreasing and it has dipped to the extent of 3 percentage point in the last 2 years, and investors also do not seem to have confidence in the economy. So how can we tackle these challenges to make our India a self-reliant India, to make it Atmanirbhar Bharat?
Oh, great. Arnav, there is a confusion or a lack of clarity regarding that term, Atmanirbhar. Whether it is a retreat from globalization to a self reliance, or whether we are giving an enabling environment to our manufacturing sector and our industries to face the global competition. This was a lack of clarity. I think over the years, it's getting clarified that it's not a retreat from globalization. It is not a measure for protectionism. So that's a clarity, we are getting. But at the same time, as you mentioned, production linked incentive schemes, it's benefiting whom? Is it, there is an elite capture over there, and whether small business firms are able to access these things, or is there any uneven access to the programs announced by the government? So that's a big concern, because as you rightly mentioned, there is a stress element in the small business firms, and of course there is certain elements of uncertainty regarding consumer confidence. For those elements to work out, the policies, just the PLC, the production linked incentive scheme, that's not enough. We need to work more on that. And I think outside the purview of budget, I hope that there will be an announcement very soon, along with the welfare measures, two announcements related to, protecting the small business firms. They have, real issues regarding the survival. They're fighting for survival, and also that gap I could also feel from the budget, that we have not announced anything explicit to support the small business firms. All we have announced is, of course, the credit infusion. And that credit infusion, it mainly happened through RBI, that liquidity infusion programs to support the recovery and the credit deployment. But you can take a look into, maybe you must have already read the work by Stiglitz and Rashid, which economic stimulus work. That's the title of that paper. And in that paper, there are concerns regarding the credit linked economic stimulus packages, whether, the multiplier effects of the credit linked economic, stimulus packages are limited. If that's the case, we need to, give more announcements from the fiscal policy front to support this so that we can prevent this uneven recovery in the sector.
Thank you, ma'am. It was nice response. And now I would like to invite Mudita to ask the
Okay.
question.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, since we're on the topic of credit stimulus, and I would like to shift the topic to health sector, which has been reeling under the pressure of pandemic since the last 2 years. The emphasis has been made on digitized healthcare with the introduction of various schemes like National Digital Health Ecosystem and National Telemental Health Program. After the pandemic, it was expected that the current state of healthcare facilities would attract the attention of the government and we would see a big push towards the healthcare spending, at least to the promise of 3 to 4% of GDP. Has the government allocated less funds than required, or is the vaccination rate kind of satisfactory for the government to have confidence in its less spending?
Oh, great. Last year's budget, we announced around 64 lakh crore in the health sector over next 6 years. But there is a lack of clarity how, that component of, infrastructure investment in health, then, from various estimates, we came to know that it's not only the health sector but health plus nutrition plus many other elements are there in that package. That lack of clarity remains in this budget. As you rightly mentioned, we have not seen any major emphasis on the public investment in the health sector. And as you mentioned, our aspiration is to increase the investment in the health sector to, as you pointed out, maybe to 4 or 5%. But the reality is, even after that major announcement in the last budget, public investment in the health sector is below 1% at the union government level. That's around 0.8% of GDP. But you know that by Schedule 7, the health, that's a major expenditure assignment or the functional assignment of the state government, the subnational government. But given that, in the time of pandemic, there are many, issues which are concurrent in nature, and center government has got an important role to play in the time of pandemic. And of course, there was increase in the allocation for vaccination, but we have to use this health crisis as an opportunity to increase the spending in the health sector, just as you mentioned, instead of ad hoc or arbitrary increases in the health sector just for vaccination or anything. But it has to be long term. It has to be a long term, increase in the health sector investment, and we have to look into the health infrastructure of primary, secondary and tertiary sectors, and R&D, research and development, and along with the vaccination programs and the other kind of readiness which is required to, God forbid that if there is another wave, God forbid that such thing should not happen, but that readiness, that investment in the health sector has to be long term, not ad hoc or arbitrary, because I'm also equally concerned about this variations or volatility in the public sector expenses or expenditure in the health sector. And you mentioned about digital. Digital infrastructure in health sector is welcome, but at the same time, especially when I think of women, children, this telemedicine, how interpreting our own illness, that's a major concern. So unless we go for proper diagnosis, if it is true that satellite or the telecommunication or even the digital infrastructure, that interpreting your own illness, I think many studies have shown that self-censorship threshold and the way women interpret her illness. So there are many things regarding how you interpret and how you convey or how you articulate your illness. That's one thing. Second thing, the digital divide. And India, the digital infrastructure, that's very uneven. So when we focus on the new economy based on the digital infrastructure, the digital economy, we need to tackle that digital divide first, so that we can give equal access to everyone regarding to the digital health infrastructure. But that emphasis on mental health, because when we talk about the health, mental health was not given adequate importance. That emphasis in the budget is welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the response. It's sure that there's a digital divide in the country. And since we're speaking on the digital front, the one you think that the government has finally broken its silence on is crypto. And it has levied a tax of 30% on it. Even though crypto is not given the currency status, do you think it is a welcome move as the government has finally acknowledged it and not imposed like a complete ban like other countries like Russia and China? Also, how do you think that this market in future is going to get given that RBI is planning to launch its own digital currency?
I think this fear of crypto is overplayed. If given the proper regulations, I think welcome to a new digital currency. That's okay. But I'm concerned about the regulatory framework. And there is a little difference between crypto because that's based on the decentralized finance and it's an asset, not currency. But CBDC, that central bank digital currency, which is announced in this budget, it's a proper digitized legal tender. Now the question is, what is its impact on economy, and whether it will facilitate, our journey towards the $1 trillion economy, which we visualize, that new economy concept. Here, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in US. I was reading that in a paper by Barry Aiken Green. They were talking about this digital dollar, or in that context, two things Janet Yellen mentioned, and I was taken aback hearing the positive side of a digital currency. What she mentioned is one, it's so powerful to tackle the financial inclusion issues, because when your country is largely unbanked, when you need to penetrate and reach out to the people, and then this digitization, of course, your point on the digital divide which we discuss right now, that's very crucial. But once we tackle that, once there is access for poor and rich equally to that digital infrastructure, can it ease transactions? Can it lead to strengthening financial inclusion? Then another thing, unlike in our country, there was a huge fiscal stimulus announced in US. That's like giving pandemic check, that cash transfer support to the people. Then what Janet Ellen mentioned was that maybe this digitization, this digital currency will help that monetary policy, fiscal policy coordination in reaching people, to ensure that the money reaches their hands, so that ease in transactions, that transaction cost is reduced here. You don't have to take a check to the bank or anything. It's like instant, in real time, so the time cost is reduced, your transaction cost is reduced, so it will ease your entrepreneurship as well, entrepreneurial skills, entrepreneurial support we can give, because in the digital, in this pandemic world, in the post pandemic, you can see that a lot of things are happening. Business is done through the digital transactions, cross border. So this will ease that, and that will ensure that entrepreneurs are supported by a smooth medium of exchange. So there is no call over the positive sides of the CBDC, but at the same time, if the regulatory framework is not on board, there are concerns regarding the financial integrity, and because it's based on a trust model and anonymity. So unless we have a regulatory framework on board, then the cross-border transactions, can it lead to some kind of unwanted outcomes? So these are the fears. But in US, they have a Fed wire. That's a kind of a built-in mechanism in which they can track the transactions. But what is that mechanism in our country to ensure this? So these are the it's not like a bolt out of blue. They have announced, I think I have read in the newspaper, in the Business Standard, that the tax ministry officials and the finance ministry officials, they mentioned that our nation, they were studying about the CBDC for the last 5 years, and this year it is announced. And you can also see that chapter in the RBI document as well, on the CBDC. So it's a well thought out process, but you're focus on taxing the thing, But I have concern over here, the taxing in the sense whether the taxation for a for crypto, that is making crypto legitimate, that you don't have to fear, it is legitimate, you go ahead with your transactions. Is that the message? Then, I understood that no, because you can tax any assets, but that doesn't make it legitimate. So legitimacy is not the thing that you're making it legal. No, that's not the concern. So this field is evolving, and we need to see, it's too early to talk about anything, but the plausible ex ante, impact on the economy is that financial inclusion aspect, easing transaction, you're supporting the entrepreneurs, which is very crucial for economic development, and also that monetary policy, fiscal policy coordination in which you can reach out to people. Of course, if the digital divide is, tackled.
Yes, ma'am, I do agree. Like there is anonymity, yeah, and there we could argue a lot of drawbacks, but it also has a few advantages. Like the ease in transactions, etc. That was a very nice answer. Over to you, Arnav.
Ma'am, I had one related question to the cryptocurrency part. I read in the newspaper that if the investor have to have the confidence in the CBDC, then we should have a very robust cryptocurrency market in our country. But as you also rightly pointed out, that government seems to be vacillating on the issue of regulation. While it has gone ahead with the taxation part, it is not very clear on the regulation part. So how do you believe about the pitting of cryptocurrency with the CBDC? What's your view on this issue?
Yeah, I think the empirical evidence shows that there are a lot of crypto dealers in India. India is like a very significant country. If you look at that empirical evidence, and so people are doing crypto transactions, but the fear is about the lack of regulatory framework. So we have to wait and see about the bill and such kind of legal announcements, because it's not really a fiscal fiat, as you rightly mentioned. It's not the realm of taxation alone. We need to look into that legal fiat. Right now, Arnab, I don't have any specific knowledge about how it's going to be rolled out on the legal side. But that's very crucial. I think our country is, preparing on those lines, and we have to wait and see.
Yes, ma'am. Finance Minister also mentioned that she has asked the experts to give their comment on the regulation part. And
Absolutely.
now I would like to move ahead with our next question. It is related to MSME sector. Ma'am, the Indian budget has provided us the opportunity to take stock of the situations of MSME. And when we analyze the situation of MSME, it has not performed well in the past 2 years. In fact, it is reeling under the pressures created by the supply chain restrictions and the lockdown. And the unemployment condition is also severely associated with the MSME. But in that backdrop, the announcement by Finance Minister that says he is going to increase the expenditure on MSME by 26% on year basis would be like a sucker for the MSME sector. So what significance does it hold for you? And how do you consider the increase in expenditure on MSME count by the government, considering the fact that rural spending had not decreased much?
Oh, great. The MSME we supported mainly through the credit infusion, right? That liquidity support was given to the MSME. And as I mentioned earlier also, credit infusion, that cannot give that intended multiplier effects. That's an area of concern. Second, as you mentioned, that's demand side. We have not announced anything substantial for the demand side recovery process. So credit is announced, the cheap credit or the cheap loan, that announcement is there. RBI has done a heavy lifting to go ahead with the liquidity infusion and to support the economy. But at the same time, why there is an uneven access? Maybe one is the fear of repayment. When there is no stable and predictable demand for their products, when there is no stability for the economic activity they will be undertaking. So, what could be the way in which, even if they take the loan, they have to repay, maybe undergoing a Ponzi finance, in the sense they have to go to either that indigenous money lenders, which we call as bad lemons in the market, to take some money at a very high rate of interest to repay the original credit they have taken. So this kind of, getting into a Ponzi in the sense you are taking money at higher rate of interest to repay the earlier debt or earlier loan or credit. So such kind of fears are there. What if our market, our products are not sold, the demand side, that part is not tackled. And second thing is, usually this credit markets there is a huge element of asymmetric information. So we have not talked about that asymmetric information and how that is integrated into the economic stimulus packages when we announced this. So credit infusion, if that's a major way to support the MSME, that's not giving the intended multiplier effects. So we have to see how we can support the MSME more than this, just the credit infusion. And I hope that outside the purview of budget, there will be very clear announcements and very clear packages to support the small, and medium industries and take them out of this crisis. But right now, things are not working very well. And another way, if I look at the strategy in which we control the pandemic, was focusing more on curfews and the lockdowns. But lockdown strategy helped us to control the pandemic in the sense that we could flatten the curve, but that led to many irreversible disruptions in the economy. So we need to tackle even that kind of issues when lockdown strategy was a major strategy to tackle the pandemic in the context of India, because each country responded to the pandemic with a different strategies. So ours was lockdown, but it was perfect. It was perfect to buy time for the health sector preparedness to prevent, the things going bad regarding, the pandemic, the health crisis. But at the same time, the economic disruptions that happened, especially in the small and medium sector, that needs to be addressed and to be studied, analyzed, and we need to support the livelihood crisis over there.
I had a question regarding this only. If the lockdown had not been extended to these months, then would the situation have been different for the MSME sectors?
Oh, Mudita, that's a counterfactual, isn't it? I don't know, because I am not telling that the single most significant determinant of the downturn in MSMEs was the lockdown strategy alone. There are many things. The demand, as I mentioned earlier, that demand side, that recovery, we have to think about some strategies to stimulate the demand side of the economy. And one thing is like, Arnav also mentioned, you also mentioned about, employment getting, reduced like anything. So the job crisis, that's what you mentioned, and that's mounting. So here the government, to support the economy by acting as an employer of last resort, like the way, monetary policy stance support as a lender of last resort. The fiscal policy of the government has to support the economy as an employer of last resort, and strengthening employment policies, that's very important to support this sector. And if I apply a gender lens, things are getting further worse in the sense, women entrepreneurs, they face a lot of issues, especially in the time of pandemic, in the lockdown process, the kind of double work burden they have undergone. So all these things, if you ask me what is a solution, employer of last resort policy is one thing, but to support that, complementary fiscal policies in terms of care economy infrastructure is also equally relevant when you have to support women entrepreneurs. So it's like a very layered sector. You need to look into the details and the sector specific issues and study that, rather than a blanket kind of solution we can given for the MSME sector.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So our next question is on climate action, which has been a major theme for this year's budget. So, the green bonds were a new concept announced by the Honorable Finance Minister, and plans to issue these bonds were made to move the nation towards carbon neutrality. How do you think green bonds would be imperative in laying the groundwork for India to become a net zero country by 2070?
Yeah, and that commitment is there. The Glasgow, the commitment is there that the country will, move towards that zero, what we call the carbon emission country, net zero carbon emission country by 2070. And whether the green bond, sovereign green bond alone can do that, no. But, if you look at the financing pattern of our country, of the deficit, it's a major part is our gross market borrowing. So the sovereign bond will also be the part of that, market borrowing. It will be the part of that, what you call the overall government's market borrowing, which they visualize in 22, 23. But there is a lack of clarity regarding which are the public sector projects, or what are the sectors in which it's going to happen and how it is linked. Because by the name green bonds, the sovereign green bonds, the kind is like it is earmarked. It's earmarked towards a specific objective that you will reduce this. So that earmarking, little more clarity is, it should be there, and we can see how it is going to get rolled out. But sovereign green bonds are welcome, because especially when there is a tug of war between the monetary policy and fiscal policy regarding the climate change commitments, that which public policy tool is more relevant and more effective. So that efficacy of monetary policy and fiscal policy towards carbon, climate change commitments. That was a huge debate, and you must be remembering the reflection by Lekha Rajan, that he mentioned RBI, or the central bank, should not get into this business of greening the monetary policy. In the sense, he mentioned that toolkits, the lack of toolkits, can lead us to trouble, and even that will lead to reputation risk if you get into this climate change commitments. That's a central bank story. And he also mentioned that central bank by mandate, they have to look into the price stability and financial stability, but not the climate change commitments, because they don't have enough toolkits. But then we can counter argue that if financial stability is your concern, in turn, this climate change related risk and uncertainties can affect your financial stability, right? So what could be that, the toolkits or the solutions to solve this? And you can take a clue from Bank of England, because that was the first central bank which has gone into, announcing certain green stress test for the top banks. When they talk about their financial stability, they need to articulate the green stress test, what's the stress elements regarding their financial decisions. And of course, Christine Lagarde of European Central Bank, she's also very positive about greening of monetary policies, but economists are divided regarding what exactly you want to look into, whether price stability, financial stability, or climate change commitments. So this will give more emphasis to fiscal policy, role of fiscal policy in the climate change commitments. So what could be the role of fiscal policy? So what we anticipated was that our government in this budget will be announcing a climate responsive budgeting as a public financial management tool. But maybe outside the purview of budget, they may announce a climate responsive budget, and the statement will be there in the expenditure budget volume 1, that how much our country is spending on climate change commitments across sectors, because it has to be a multi-sectoral approach. But all we have announced is about it's a significant announcement about the green bonds, and we have to wait and see how this earmarking happens, and what are the sectors, what are the public sector projects in which the proceeds are earmarked, and towards which commitment within this broad objectives of climate financing statement. Otherwise, so far we have dealt with this issue only through ecological fiscal transfers. That decision was taken by 14th Finance Commission on the fiscal policy front, that we transferred, a kind of tax transfers we have given to the state governments to protect the net forest car. So that ecological fiscal transfer was the important instrument in India towards the climate change initiatives. But right now, for the first time ever, our budget is, as a policy tool, is giving a lot of importance to the climate change commitments. And let's see about the green bonds, how it is going to be rolled out. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a great response. We were just thinking it in a positive perspective, but you gave the intersectoral dimension of green bond. And related to this, I have one question. That ever since the BJP government came to power in 2014, it has been providing a very renewed focus to startups in our country. And this was also visible in the last budget, in the coming budget, that finance minister has provided one more year for new startups to be incorporated and to take the tax benefits. But on the other hand, we are also seeing that government is providing increased push towards the new and emerging technologies like the battery swapping facilities, the electric vehicles, and the sunrise sector particular. So how do you consider this juggernaut of giving the emphasis on startups on the one hand and relating it with the new and emerging technologies?
Of course, these are welcome initiatives, but we need to see that demand side as well. When we talk about a new economy and we need to understand that what is working. So I think here I look forward to understand that sector better, because right now I don't have any clarification regarding how it's going to be supported the economy. So I don't think there. Let's wait and see. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would invite Mudita to ask the question.
Yeah, okay, I will answer. Sorry. My next question is that the question is also asked to utilize of budgetary allocation as we have talked before. For instance, the National Agricultural Infrastructure Fund was all size of 1 lakh crore rupees. However, the applicants of both these 10,000 crores have only been identified till now. Similarly, the startup initiatives, etc. So funds are languishing but not utilization for this thing. How do you think the budget tackle this problem?
Oh, that's great. And in some aspects, I'm not also facing this issue of this is what we technically call as fiscal malnutrition. The issues related to what you announce in the budget and what actually realize, and there's a significant deviation between what announced and what is real. So why is this so? And this is that budget implications. I think also one of the questions about the credibility of your numbers, and that's very good, because when we talk about the business and the business way, announcing is one thing, but the budget for forecast on what is the forecast error, and we need to minimize the forecast error. Otherwise, it can happen to many things. We have possibilities, but something, and it can happen to the brand practices, and also it can happen to the bias policy making and assumption and projection laws of this can happen. And I think I have not having worked with my director of Chakraborty, we have looked into the budget sector wise, not only for the national government, but also the national government. And we identified that the tax, the intergovernmental fiscal transfer in the form of grants and capital incentive. These are the areas in which the fiscal malfunction suffer the most. And particularly, of course, they reflected this year, because we have got all the estimates realistic this time. You can understand. But now there's a new kind of debate that whether we are keeping budget in sort of an underestimation that's another thing. But mentally, the credibility, the budget credibility can go up your deviation between the budget being revised with the actual. You're very close. That's one thing. And second, that is something why there was fiscal errors, because we have a fiscal rule that we need 3% of the GDP, our fiscal deficit. So where you can't do the fiscal consolidation equals less 3% of GDP, your fiscal deficit, when the taxes are not point, when the taxes are uncertain, you may go through expenditure got, repercussions in the economy in terms of the growth rate coming across. That's why, this year, the last year's budget, our president was applying for a high kind of budget transparency was also there. And this year's budget, however, we pegged it to 6.8% of GDP, but slight fiscal surplus was there in that there was 6.9%, but the financial year 2022 we anticipate that it can be reduced to 6.4, but the medium-term fiscal consolidation is exactly go back to not only 3%, but 4.5 by 2026. So this is the mandatory framework. Now, what does fiscal preference, why that's happening, and how can support it, especially you mentioned about the agricultural sector. And agricultural sector, I think there is reduction in low capital formation. And you can understand that the operating fiscal rules, because many of activities typically do not benefit. So we thought that we do that fiscal consolidation by curtailing capital spending. So that capital spending over the years, you look at that has come down. But right now, this capital spending on capital infrastructure is given huge emphasis. But this capital spending is public sector investment. Agricultural sector, like those capital formation over the years is declined. And that's an area of concern. And I like about the agricultural sector you mentioned. The prime concern is this decline in the growth capital formation in the agricultural sector. And now, I just want to relate it into the commercial line. What exactly you want to support the farmers, whether to income support or whether to provide support. This is a debate. Like many economists believe that don't go ahead with this distortion. Price distortions are very relevant sector. So go via income transfer. So this debate is conclusive. And I are studying about the minimum support price and why we are not increasing it. Because whether we need the minimum support price was social priority, whether actually incentivize by those content of products, whether that we not including diversity. Many issues are whether they actually including the agricultural sector by holding farmers to income transfer. So this budget, we have now 9,000 rupees, and then that cash transfer, cash transfer, the roads, as an output for the economy. We cannot deny, but at the same time, the price mechanisms, how we can integrate the sector, we need to take it as little in the inclusive. We have to be very specific, go without.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind response. And taking cues from your response, I would now like to draw your attention towards the agriculture sector. Ma'am, agriculture has been one of the economic activities in the past 2 years, which has responded to the pandemic very resiliently. But currently, if we see the budget allocation, it has been decreased for the agriculture. The fertilizer subsidy has been decreased. And similarly, several farmer organizations are pointing out that though government has increased the expenditure for procurement of paddy and wheat under MSP, government do not provide similar kind of opportunities for procurement of other crop other than paddy and wheat. And they are also mourning the decrease in subsidy of fertilizer. And if we see the National Food Security Act, there also the food subsidy has been decreased by the government. So how do you consider all these numbers? Do you believe that government has been able to do the justice with the agriculture sector that it deserves?
Yeah, I can't agree with you that all these are areas of concern. And there is a political economy also when we talk about the agricultural sector and food security. And food security, that's like your concern. When you come along the growth process through economic development programs, the package is just growth recovery. Then you are not get a paradigm itself or a framework itself. You need to go beyond economic growth framework for sustainable development framework in which really nobody behind has to be very real policies on the ground or to tackle this pandemic crisis. From that background, agricultural sector is a crucial sector, and along with this increasing policy packages, we also announcement. And here what I could learn, as a student of public economics, what I could learn is that consultative process is very important before you arrive at public policy. So that public action and public policy linkages of the public policy decision. And also I believe that in this sector, gross capital formation coming down, and that need to back up and you need to support more structural investment. And I got the transfers versus the private sector. So I believe in 2014 also, our minister mentioned about doubling the farmer income within 5 years. So those doubling of farmers' income, then the sector has to grow, maybe at 14%, of GDP or something like that. So what are the, what is a roadmap, or what are the clear policy directions towards, doubling of farmers' income within 5 years? So these are the crucial concerns, and that's it. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for this answer. So, drawing from your expertise in gender budgeting, just for the benefit of the viewers, would you like to explain what is gender budgeting? And even though in the actual terms it has increased in this budget, in the nominal rate it has decreased or it has been constant. So, what do you think are the implications of that?
Oh, great.
Ma'am,
This.
before you
Yeah, tell
answer
me,
this
Arnav. Yeah,
question, can we
sure,
add something to Mudita's question?
sure,
Yeah,
sure,
sure.
sure.
Go
Ma'am,
ahead.
I felt that you were banking on off-budget expenditure. You were expecting that government will increase the off-budget expenditure in the coming months. But currently seeing the privatization drive by the government, I personally do not feel that government will increase expenditure in social sector. So how will you consider this view?
Oh, great. When I mentioned that there may be an announcement in the welfare, related expenses, what I meant was not off budget, but supplementary demand for grants. There are certain borrowing which are a part of, fiscal deficit. And as you mentioned, certain announcements regarding borrowings are off budget. For instance, if you undertake the borrowing through public sector entities or the corporate bodies, by definition of fiscal deficit, those kind of borrowings are not a part of your fiscal deficit. So your fiscal deficit, that 3%, that narrative will be well protected if you go ahead with some off-budget borrowings, which you show in some annexure table. So, in regarding the supplementary demand for grants, of course, this year there was an instruction for this expenditure prioritization, and also there was an instruction that you can't go beyond an RE when you provide these estimates. That budgetary process. It starts with a call circular. Through the call circular, you asked all the sectors to come up their demand for grants. Then, that process, there was given a clear instruction that you cannot go for that additional, demand for grants and all at this moment. So that I read in Business Standard, and I also understood from the close policy circles. So the moment we incorporate the off-budget borrowings, then the coverage of the deficit will go higher, and public sector borrowing requirement is the right deficit measurement. The general deficit, that concept of a general government or the PSBR, it's more than that. It's the three levels of government plus public sector transactions. And we don't have the data ready about the intra-sectoral transactions in the public sector. And also at the third tier, the data is a little bit diced. So that's why, we are unable to construct this PSBR. But the moment country come up with the data on PSBR, your that concern will be answered, that we have to make the budget transparency 100%, and budget won't be opaque or non-transparent the moment we talk about PSBR. Otherwise, as you mentioned, this off-budget liabilities, that's a kind of a budget non-transparency exercise. That's well taken. And now, that original question from Mudita was regarding, I got carried away by that point on budget transparency by Arnav, and I forgot your question. Can you repeat?
Ma'am, so drawing from your expertise in gender
Gender
budgeting, right?
budgeting. Okay,
Right.
okay, okay. Oh, great. I was like, overwhelmed by that question about budget transparency by Arnav. Of course, it's a topic very close to my heart, gender budgeting. And it began in our country in 2000, It is a fiscal innovation because, in 2000, it was very difficult to articulate to finance ministry about gender. They were asking, what are you talking about? Gender is not our cup of tea. You can connect to this analysis the moment I, ask you to imagine what's happening in the center bank. Nobody's talking about gender, right? No center bank governors so far talked about gender. That's quite alien. That was the time. Finance minister was unable to connect. Finance ministry was like, what exactly are you talking about gender in public finance? Then it was like a revolution, and it was like, a group of economists. We have that international a working group on gender and macro. Like, many economists come forward and start working on gender in macro, integrating gender in macro policy. So that kind of a revolution happened, and the academic papers come up, and what kind of policies we can put forward. And I'm announcing about my budget. I'm about my book. That's the first time I'm officially, formally announcing. My book on gender budgeting will be out soon, and it will be by Palgrave Macmillan, and I think it will be a great companion for the students who are interested in gender budgeting. So let's wait for that book, and okay. So I feel very overwhelmed when I announced that first time, for you. And gender budgeting is you apply a gender lens in the fiscal policy making. It can be ex ante and it can be ex post. In the sense, if you prima facie look into the budget documents, it's gender neutral. But that gender neutrality should not turn gender blind. And in order to prevent that, that socio-economic asymmetry in your indicators, if you look at education, health, labor force participation, when you have that asymmetry, you say that our, fiscal policy that is, gender neutral, then that can lead to unintended consequences. And I do believe that when people have unfreedom, based on equal opportunity, if you provide the public service provisioning, in the sense schools, colleges, hospitals, based on equal opportunity, Arnab, Lekha, Mudita, come and access. We don't discriminate anybody. It's an equal opportunity paradigm. But that equality in the processes has not led to equality in outcomes. When you look at the access statistics, why Lekha is not accessing, why Mudita could access, why Arnab is not able to access. So these kind of, unevenness in the access statistics that is coming up from the benefit incidence analysis of the public expenditure, then we need to correct. And the kind of constraints Arnab has and the kind of constraints I have may be different. So we need to work into that. And the role of public policy is to remove the unfreedom of people and take everybody on board to enjoy the public service provisioning equally. So, what is that public policy which we need to think about to remove the unfreedoms of people? And gender budgeting is exactly that. There are a lot of issues related to the access of men and women to the market economy. That's what we call it, right? So, what are those constraints? And so, gender budgeting is a very powerful framework to work towards those kind of sustainable development goals we have.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us on budgeting. It is a very, very important concept. And thank you for the announcement of your book as well. We are so looking forward to it. And that was all from our side. And
Modita, can I ask one question? Ma'am, I
yeah,
could not
yes,
resist
Sure.
myself. I have to ask one thing. Like I earlier I mentioned about off budgeting, that was a different thing. But I feel that in case of Manrega, government is continuously allocating less money than it is required. In fact, RTI activists are claiming that we need at least 2.16 lakh crore rupees in order to cater to the demand of all persons. But when government allocate less money than required, it's like a demand separation for the people. So how can we address this problem? Because government is allocating less money, and that will act as a artificial demand separation for the people.
Oh, great. In the beginning also I mentioned that the questions, both of you, that composition, that content, it's both intelligent and humane. And he's not leaving me, he wants me to answer his concern. That's a very crucial question you raised. And heterodox economist, when you grow up, you will understand that which school of thought influence you, whether it's neoclassical or heterodox. I can understand that both of you are a little bit, like the way I think about the economy, it's like a heterodox thought process is there in you, that you're able to understand what is neoclassical economics, and you're also equally able to understand what is heterodox school of thought. And that is, it's brilliant. And hats off to your professors, who made you aware that it's not only neoclassical, that's economics, but it's a beauty of understanding all schools of thought. Having said that, employment policy is a very crucial policy for growth recovery. And the narrative of our government was, we go ahead with government as an employer of last resort, and we provide people participation income rather than basic income. So this, in this debate of participation income versus basic income is like huge stimulus packages announced in the sense that you provide universal basic income or the cash transfers into the hands of people. We have not gone through that path. Rather, we gave emphasis to participation income, that let people participate in the economic activity and earn an income. If that's a narrative, then look at the empirical evidence. As you mentioned, there is decline in the allocations. And of course, I listened to the officials that they told that you don't have to be concerned about this reduction in the allocations, because based on the demand, that allocation, that space is there for increasing that, then you don't have to worry about it. But Arnav has, he has taken the crux out of it. But such kind of underestimation, or when you announce, or when you drastically reduce, by highlighting the demand is the concern, can it work well? Because it can affect into their activity. They're planning for the long term in terms of designing wages, designing the mandates. There are many concerns regarding that. But the moment you get assurance through that budgetary support, you will be able to plan all those things perfect. Whether otherwise, the moment, based on the demand, that we will respond to the budgetary allocations, then there is a time lag in the process. Like by the time the money arrives the kit, there is a delay in paying wages to the workers. Then after getting wages after a long time, all these have unintended macroeconomic consequences in the delay process. And so, as you rightly pointed out, I do completely agree with you that based on the demand, please don't drastically cut this thing. Protect the allocations so that it gives us predictability and certainty, and there will not be any lag in the economic activity process, whether it's a delay in the wages or delay in the design and other kinds of elements which you need to work out when you announce a policy as a right to work policy. Because there was a confusion whether Enriga was a right to work or it is to alleviate the poverty. It is both. It's a right. It's a right. It's a right to work. So we need to, and I do completely agree that, and it should have been protected. Rather than, okay, based on demand we will increase. Of course, that's okay, but the alternative which you suggested would have been better, that protected allocations. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. We are very elated to discuss these things with you.
Thank you
I
so much,
hope you
Arnav.
don't have any more questions, Arnav.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It was great having you. It was an immense pleasure hosting you. And we extend a vote of thanks from our principal, the magazine probe, and our society caucus. It was very nice hosting you. Thank you,
Absolutely.
ma'am.
It was
Thank you,
awesome.
ma'am.
Thank you, Arnav. And thank you, Mudita. All the best to you.